Hi, it's Sunny with areakphotos. This is the second water tutorial, but third actual tutorial that I'm doing for YouTube so far. Uh, got a lot of good feedback on the first video. A lot of people don't actually have Photoshop or Baviza 2, which are two of the main applications that we use for editing. So this one is strictly going to be done in Lightroom to kind of just to show you that you can still get comparable results. Just maybe not as in-depth as if you had Photoshop, but it'll definitely do the job. So we're going to start off. We have our image right here. The main thing I'm going to check first, like I always do, is the crop. Again, I'm slightly crooked on it. It just happens when you're moving in the water. So the first thing I'm going to do is select my crop tool right here, and I'm going to rotate it, which isn't too bad. It looks like this hillside is going to make it look like it's still crooked, but that's just the direction it's going. It's actually coming to you a little bit, so it makes it look a little bit crooked, but I think it's acceptable, and I'm just kind of composing my image right here. The main focus I want to be the reflections and of course the wave right here. So I'll kind of scoot it over until I get it to where I want it. There we go, and I'll double click and it locks it down. Now, the second thing I go through is my lens correction. I'm shooting with a 16-35. This is at, looks like about 35 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and check this to see what it does. There's the before and the after. Again, it typically will lighten out the sides and kind of provide a more natural light. You saw how it kind of drew the barrel a little bit closer to us. That's just the lens distortion getting corrected on here. If you don't like this, you don't have to use this. Or if you want to make manual adjustments, you can use the tool right here for distortion. You can see it. You could take it either direction you want. I kind of like right about there, about 90, 91. No special numbers, not a magical number. It's going to change on every image because the direction that you shoot, it's going to affect the bend of the image. So right now we have a pretty decent image. When I shoot, I typically don't add saturation or anything like that in camera. It's pretty straightforward and flat, really plain image. That's why there's not a lot of pop to the image right now. The main tools that we're going to use, white balance, exposure, contrast, highlights, basically everything in the basic tab right here is the main thing that we're going to need. Next thing that I'm going to do is look around the image, kind of zoomed in, just to see if it's sharp enough where I want it to be, which is solid right there. And then just going around to see if there's any water spots on my lens or just any distracting objects on here. It's a pretty empty wave shot and no one on the beach, so we don't have to worry about cloning them out. If you really want a pixel peep, you can see like this, maybe a trash bag or a rock on there. I may or may take it out. Person up top, you have a sign right there. So these are things that personally I would take out. I'm not going to say it's really possible with Lightroom. I'm sure you could if you spend enough time on it, but that would probably take way more time than it's worth. So we could just do basics with Lightroom to see what it does. So I guess we'll just start right here, because that's the only thing that really stands out to me right off the bat. I'm just choosing my spot removal tool. Again, I'm using the mouse. I could scroll down to expand it or up to shrink it down. I'm just trying to get right around that exact size, and I'll click on it right there. That did a pretty solid clean job on it. You can see on the side you actually have a couple options on here. You have the clone tool, which is one where it'll copy from a different location. The heal does the same thing except for blends it in a lot smoother. Typically the best one that I like or prefer, opacity is typically almost always going to be 100%. Feather, that's kind of, I believe, the default in Lightroom is about 35, and that works really well feathering is just basically the radius around the actual circle that you're selecting, and it kind of softens it outward, so it gives a more natural blend versus just like a harsh, sharp line on it. So we'll get out, and simple things, I'm just left clicking on the mouse to zoom in, then you left click to move out. If you want to move around your image, you can click in, you can hold down on the space bar to do the same thing, zoom in and out. So it's pretty universal on here, pretty easy to use. Now looking at the image, we're going to go ahead and start pulling in some blacks on here just because it looks a little flat. Now a couple different things, the blacks, this affects the image globally. What I mean is every color in this image is affected when you pull the black in. You can kind of see it all right there. Now if you use contrast, this is just your midtones, so it's not going to get all the colors, but more so just those midtones is the only part it's actually going to affect on here. You can see the big difference on that. So right here with the contrast tool, or you go with your blacks, so you can kind of see the difference on it, on how it affects. A lot of people really can't tell the difference on the blacks and contrast because they're very similar functions, but that's basically what it is. Contrast again is your midtones. Black will affect the entire image. And that's going to be the same with whites. Whites are going to affect the entire image globally on here. So I'll go ahead and put these back to 0. Now exposure, it looks pretty decent. The hillside's a little lighter than this foreground right here, but I'm just going to go ahead and adjust a little bit, brighten it just a bit, and I'm doing so because I know I'm going to be darkening it a little bit with the contrast on here. There we go. I'm going to try and pull in a little bit on the blacks. I'm typically a fan of the little darker style on it. There we go. Shadows, we're not really losing any shadows on here except for possibly in the little cracks on here, so we'll go ahead and pull open the shadows a little bit. I'm not going to really see too much of a difference on it. And then let's go ahead and play with our vibrance on here. Now vibrance is the same thing as the contrast. It's not going to affect all of the color. It's mainly the midtones on here. Saturation is going to be everything. You're going to basically flood the whole image. So actually, let's just go ahead and peek these out so you can see. That's the vibrance. And if you went saturation. So typically you try not to max either of these sliders out too much. Otherwise you do affect the print quality of the image. You get a more bleeded look to it. So let's just give you an example. Let's go ahead and just go to about, here I'm at about 29 right now, and that's pretty high. You see a little brightness on it. If I go that high on the vibrance or any higher, let's just say like, let's go to 40, then I'm going to pull away on the saturation just to even out the coloring on it. Now this will usually take down to about -4, -5. And to me that looks super super colored, which is nice, but not to my liking so much, so I'm going to pull it down just a little bit, right around about 30. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and kind of hit on this hillside a little bit. It is pretty, there's a pretty big difference between here and the wave itself on exposure wise. So the easiest way you can do this one with Lightroom is use the adjustment tool, adjustment brush again, and I'm just going to always reset it at 0. You're going to see you have a couple different options on here, temperature, tint, and everything. This is if you just want to brush them individually. You don't necessarily want to affect the entire image, but just a small portion of it. So let's go ahead and we'll start by brushing this area up here. Now I'm going to shrink my tool down because I don't want it to bleed over too much. There we go. And the way I'd start it, I just kind of brush a little bit. You're not going to see anything right now because all the sliders are reset really at 0. And now I can kind of adjust these to whatever I want. Now you can see Density, I keep it typically around 45, the flow about 80%, and feathering about 82. These are pretty default from Lightroom, so there's no real magical trick to it. It's personal preference too, how heavy-handed you are when you're actually adjusting. I'm using a Wacom tablet, which is basically a little pen stylus versus a mouse. So I have more of the pressure sensitivity on it. I can adjust the flow a lot better with it. So we're just going to go ahead and brush this in real quick. You can see it pulls out a little bit more color in there and also darkens at the same time. And I'll do it in two parts. I'll get this main part right here, and then I'll kind of look and test a spot on the sky to see if that is what I want as well. So it's actually kind of a nice blue because it was fairly blown out that day. We'll go ahead and finish up with sky on there too. And once you get in really close to the wave or another, the other objects here, you're going to start seeing that halo. So I'll paint over typically a little bit on here. And the big problem that you're going to see is this darkening right here at the edge of the wave. So what you can do is zoom in and go to your erase tool. And again, percentages, you can kind of play with these, how much you want to erase. But I'm going to shrink down my brush size just a little bit so I can get closer to it. And you can see we're getting rid of the brush adjustment right on the edge of the photo, or the edge of the wave, sorry. So it gives a little more natural look to it. And if you mess up on any of this, you can of course repaint over or Command or Apple Z. And again, this is something that's a lot easier in Photoshop itself, just because you can create a layer mask, and a lot easier just to kind of go back and forth and control it. When you're doing this too, if you have no idea, your eye is not really that good, but you know it's kind of off, if you actually are in Lightroom, you hit the O, it'll actually show you in red or pink tones because it's not on full flow where you are. So when I'm erasing now, it's just erasing the pink. So I know I don't accidentally go over and redo what I'm trying to get rid of. So I'll go ahead and touch this up. This takes, a good fair amount of time on here. Try and do as fast as I can for the tutorial purposes so we're not watching me paint an entire photo. There we go. Get a little bit of that edge right there. And I'm just holding down the space bar and dragging with the mouse to move through the image. See a little pink right here. Pretty valuable tool to actually be able to physically see where you've painted versus just kind of looking at the exposure, because a lot of times very similar. You won't notice it until you start making a whole bunch more adjustments, but it's easier to catch it in the beginning so you're not having to redo all your work that you've done. There we go. All right, perfect. Now you can see also on some of the whitewash, I don't typically like whitewash to be purple, different colors. A lot of people like to have a little colorful rainbows, and that's really affected by the vibrance and the saturation on it. So I'll typically pull away from that a little bit. For that, I might pull down the flow of it and increase my brush size just to make it blend in a little bit more naturally. Alright, so let's go ahead and I can zoom out by hitting that Z key if you want. That's another shortcut. And now we see our image, which it does look a little bit darker now, but I can play with my adjustment. There's my exposure. I'm at about, -1.08. I can add in some highlights if I want. I could pull out some shadows, and I can even pull in my clarity, which will basically sharpen up the image a little bit. Now, this is just all done by your eye, really, just looking at the image to see if it looks the way you like it. And it's all personal preference. Some people might add more saturation to the hillside. You can warm it up if you want. This is the nice thing. Once you've laid down the tracks with your brush, you can adjust just that section with the sliders. You can see how you can adjust your white balance on here. But I think white balance was pretty spot on for that day. And another thing that I might do too is I might test that on some of the other areas just to see. Oops, we're still under erase, so let's go back to the brush by clicking on the A. And we can test that on here. And I might darken it up a little too much, so we can pull that back off. So again, it's really up to your eye. There's personal preference on it. But this image looks pretty decent so far. I might tweak the overall exposure. You saw that I did click the brush tool once I was done with it, and that basically puts us back into the standard editing mode. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to kind of tweak just a little bit, maybe bring up the exposure. That's way too hot. There we go. Another thing you can do is you can use that tool right there, which is a gradiated adjustment tool. I'm going to click with the mouse down and kind of drag it up a little bit. And you could do some adjustments this way as well. So if I want to lighten up the foreground just a little bit, I can do so. And basically what it's doing is just like a graduated fill on the adjustment. There we go. So if I want to see the before and after, there's a, I don't even know what the name of the key is on there, but right above your return key, so backslash, you can push that and it'll show you right here at the top right, that's your before, and you click it again and it'll show you your after. My computer's completely lagging right now, so it'll just take a minute, but there we go. Again, before and after. So not too bad. Straight out of Lightroom. Does a decent job on it. I could warm up the entire image a little bit more if I think it's looking a little too blue or green. But I kind of like it. It's not too bad. So one other thing, last thing I'll actually show you on here, since we're pretty much done with the image, I usually will zoom in just to make sure it doesn't look really painted anywhere, because that'll affect the actual print quality on it. I'm typically zooming in 100 so I can see. That's pretty smooth, pretty clean. There's nothing that looks really grainy or pixelated or has that painted look to it, so it should be a pretty solid, clean image on it. There we go. Now, with this image, we did all these adjustments. This is something you can kind of keep in mind. It's not necessarily going to work for 100% of your images, but if you're shooting very similar or comparable lighting, and your basic adjustments are going to be the same, what you can do once you've done all these basic adjustments, you can go to your presets, you can click on it, name your preset that you want. So I could just put daytime fix, okay? And you can check all the options that you've changed, or you can individually check them. So for example, if I want to do every single thing, including my brush adjustments, and copy those and use them on another image, I can, but it's probably not going to work right because we did the individual brush adjustments. So I might keep everything on here, but I might take off the brush adjustments, or I might take off graduated filters. So it's really your personal preference on here. But this is how you can create a preset. Let's just go ahead and we'll just test it for now. We'll create this one under daytime fix, and you see it shows up right here. So what that means, I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this image real quick. Then I'm going to go back to our original, and I'm going to click on reset to remove all the adjustments that we did. Alright, so let's go ahead and we can test out our new filter that we made. It was daytime fix, so we look at the side, there's no adjustments done yet. Let's go ahead and click on daytime fix, and it puts everything that we just did. So that is pretty solid on there, pretty straightforward. It looks like the one thing we might have unchecked was the crop on it. So I'll go ahead and I'll reset that image one more time. And I'm just going to go back over to that same image that we made all the adjustments, hit copy, and I'll even copy the crop on here. Let's go back and let's paste it to the new image. So that's also another way you can do it if you don't want to necessarily create the whole preset, because there's pretty rare chance that you're going to have the exact same adjustments on every single image. But should you have that happen, then you can create the preset there, or the other way was the way I just showed you. You can hit copy, check whatever adjustments you made that you want to use, and then you can just go to the image and paste them on. So these two should look exactly the same now. There we go. And one cool thing, if you really want to see exactly what you did and how big of a difference it is, this tool right here will actually let you compare. So you can see side by side obvious difference on it, and you can click it again. It gives you different options for viewing, or you can see it right here. So it's pretty cool. You can zoom in even and see how big of a difference you made. You could really see the difference with the waterline. So it's pretty cool. Just helpful features. There's a lot of different viewing options on these. It's really personal preference on it. This one's kind of my favorite just because it's a defined line where you could actually see it. And to go back to the standard image, just click on right here. That's pretty much it. If you've created a preset similar to my previous tutorial, you can right click, export it to wherever you like. We'll do this one with Instagram, and it'll put it to my Dropbox. The next tutorial will probably have the creation of the presets. So again, let me know any feedback you have. Like the video if you want, or just give me comments. I'd like to see what you guys actually want to see and find out if it's actually helping out anyone. I do a lot of different tips and tricks. There's no single way that I'll edit a photo. I do keep the basics the same, but a lot of times I'll use a lot of different programs or different techniques. So if you see something that works better for you, let me know. I can touch on that, or if you have any tips or tricks you want to share yourself, leave them in the comments or send me an email at areakphotos@mac.com. You can feel free to stop by Instagram. Username is @areakphotos. That's AREAKPHOTOS. And lastly, the images that I do actually create and sell are available for viewing on my website, which is www.areakphotos.com. Thanks for watching.